Today I'm going to be talking about something very near and dear to me. That is Darude Sandstorm, the so-called music video. Although I think it contains something much more deeper, darker, something about the harrowing story of a man who will throw away everything in order to secure a future for his alternative, albeit loved, family. Let's get right into it. Our video begins with a shot of Helsinki Cathedral, a popular tourist destination in Finland. Something that you'll notice is that there's a surprising lack of tourists on the usually busy steps of the cathedral. We'll come back to that in a little while. The next thing that we see are the four main characters of our video. The thief, a male security guard, a female security guard, and, of course, Darude. Now, the first thing you might notice about the security guards is their alternative uniforms. It appears to be some sort of vest over street clothing. Another thing that you'll notice is they are openly carrying firearms. They have holsters on the side of their bodies, so they're not concealed, or at any point were concealed. Now, if we refer to the Finland Private Security Act, and I'm quoting this, firearms may be carried in a way that is visible to others only if the assignment or dangerous nature of the situation exceptionally calls for it. It also states that firearms may only be carried in personal guarding or security transit when guarding a person or object that is significant in terms of public interest and the circumstances of the assignment render it necessary to carry firearms. So, what that means, in short, is these security guards are guarding something that is incredibly dangerous, somebody very powerful might want it, and the safekeeping of this object is of the interest of the Finnish people and or government. Now, of course, this begs the question, why is such an object that is so dangerous, or would have dangerous men wanting it, only guarded by 2 security guards? And why are these 2 security guards relatively lightly armed? They only seem to be carrying pistols, with no personal body armor of any sort. We will get back into the circumstances of the situation in a little while. Now let's get right on to the chase, shall we? As the thief leads our 2 security guards the winding back alleys of downtown Helsinki, we begin to notice some things about the guards. Starting with the male security guard, the way he handles himself, I think it's safe to say that he is a professional, likely ex-police or ex-military. The way he runs and handles his weapon evidence this. Now, the female security guard, on the other hand, seems to be much less of a professional. She runs a lot slower, she's always lagging behind, and she handles her weapon in a much more loose manner. Now, this is specifically interesting because if we refer back to the Finnish Private Security Act, and I quote, "Firearms, gas sprays, and telescopic batons may only be carried by guards who have undergone special forcible means training, meeting the requirements approved by the Ministry of the Interior, and have annually demonstrated evidence of sufficient skill in handling and shooting firearms. Temporary guards are not allowed to carry firearms." So, only professional guards are allowed to carry firearms. However, clearly someone who is not a professional is carrying a firearm. Now, I think we can agree that at this point the circumstances of this situation are fishy at best. We have 1 single professional security guard, a unprofessional security guard. They only seem to be meeting the bare minimum requirements to be guarding an object that is of significant public interest. That's not to mention the fact that they're wearing civilian clothing underneath their corporate security garb, which leads me to believe that this job was on relatively short notice, so short notice in fact, that they didn't have time to come to their HQ or wherever they store uniforms and put those on. Now, this all leads me to believe that whoever originally ordered the transport of this object never wanted it to get to where it was meant to be. Now, before we go down that rabbit hole, let's move right on to the end of the video, where we see the female security guard betray the male security guard, embrace our thief, and run off into the distance, with Darude looking very pleased with himself. Now, let's examine the initial reaction between the thief and the female security guard. When the female security guard initially betrays her partner, we see the thief looking incredibly elated, and the female security guard so elated that they hug in a situation that probably would not tactically call for it. Then they go prancing off into the distance, holding hands. Now, while it may seem obvious, it is evident that these two have some sort of prior relationship, although what might not be obvious is the fact that this prior relationship was not a platonic one, implying that it was a sexual one fueled by a burning lust that one can very clearly see behind the eyes of both the thief and the female security guard. If you haven't clued in at this point already, what I'm saying is that these two are lesbian lovers, and were so before the heist of the briefcase. Now, at this point, you might be thinking that this heist is the product of two career criminals who also happen to be lesbian lovers who wanted to secure their future by stealing a potentially valuable object. Now, while this theory might be nibbling at the edges of the truth of what's really going on in this video, I think we're missing a number of key points here. The first and most obvious being that Darude is playing a key part in this. He's along for the ride the entire way. He's very calm the entire way. He's obviously professional. He's done something like this before. The next part being that I don't think either of the women are career criminals or professionals at all. Obviously, we see the way the female security guard handles herself. It's not exactly a professional nature. And while the thief may be indeed good at running, we see she's clearly very scared the entire way. An emotion that a career criminal would likely be able to hide in the heat of the action. So what we're seeing in our three perpetrators is that we have two unprofessionals working with one cool collected professional, that being Darude. Now, because the other two aren't professionals, it also eliminates the fact that maybe they're hired help. So we have one professional carrying out a job with the help of two unprofessionals. So what's up with that? Well, we'll get into that a little bit later. For now, let's wrap this up and move on to the last portion of the video. Now, here we see our trader and the thief boarding a small pleasure craft, seemingly commanded by Darude. They depart from what can only be assumed to be Helsinki Harbor, out into the open seas. Now, we can actually figure out where they're going based on the position of the sun and the number of shots they saw, assuming they are in chronological order, but we'll get into that in a minute. Firstly, let's look at the two women. Once again, it does appear as if they are lesbian lovers. The way they look at each other is very clear that there's something much more than a platonic friendship there. Now, let's look at something a little bit more interesting. Throughout the chase scene, we have seen Darude be relatively emotionless. He shows very little, if any, emotion. He betrays nothing. However, we do see 2 points where he does show emotion. The first being when the female security guard betrays her partner, and the second being as the trio make their escape into open waters. Now, this betrayal of emotion leads me to believe that he was personally connected to this job. He wasn't just hired help. Now, this would seemingly eliminate the theory that he is a career criminal. However, I don't think it does. For this next part of the video, we're going to have to take a little bit of a demographics lesson in the religions of both Estonia and Finland. Looking at Finland, the main religion is the Evangelical Lutheran Church of Finland, making up a whopping 73.8% of the population. Moving on to Estonia, we see that the major religion is Eastern Orthodox, making up 16.15% of the population. Now, interestingly enough, this is the majority religion. The majority of the population is in fact not religious. Now, you might be thinking at this point, what does the religious portions of the populations of both Estonia and Finland have to do with this heist? Well, it has a great deal to do with this heist. Let's go back to the start of the video. Where does it take place? Helsinki Cathedral. Helsinki Cathedral is part of the Finnish Evangelical Lutheran Church. Now, this is the first of a number of assumptions I'm going to make, but we need to assume that the Helsinki Cathedral was the final destination for our object, and it is where it was intercepted by the thief. Now, what would you deliver to a cathedral? Well, obviously, a object of significant religious purpose. Now, we can only speculate as to what this object is, but it's obviously important enough to merit visibly armed security guards. Now, before continuing, let's take a step back here and look at Finland and Estonia. Estonia is the closest country to Finland that does not share a land border. And if we look at religion in Estonia, we see that it is dwindling very quickly. The vast majority of the population is either atheist or undeclared, which means the Eastern Orthodox Church, the last remaining vestibule of religion in Estonia, must feel incredibly threatened. Perhaps so threatened that they need a way to boost religion in Estonia, a solid way to get people to go to church. And what better way to do that than secure a rare religious artifact? An artifact so rare and of such significance that none of the world has seen it. An object so rare that the Finnish government has been keeping it under wraps for many, many years. Now, how would the Eastern Orthodox Church in Estonia know about such an object that is closely guarded by the Finnish government, you might ask? Well, I think it's pretty obvious. They have a mole in the Finnish government. Now, I think this theory is further corroborated by the fact that, well, let's look back at the start of the video. Helsinki Cathedral is largely abandoned. There are not a lot of tourists there. Well, there are generally a lot of tourists there. Now, who has the power to stop throngs of tourists from flocking to a well-known landmark in Helsinki? Well, I think the only people that come to mind are Helsinki's finest, the police. And the police are, as you know, a public service, meaning they answer to the government, which may mean that they answer to our Estonian mole, who, looking into aiding the heist of the object, orders all tourists be stopped from entering Helsinki Cathedral. Now, while we're at it, perhaps this mole in the government, with all his power for the police, is the one who originally ordered the object to be moved from its prior, presumably safe location to Helsinki Cathedral. It would explain the poorly equipped and evidently poorly screened security detail that is guarding the object. So, where does Darude come into all of this? Well, I think it's quite clear that he's a career criminal hired by the Estonian church to secure this object for their own means. And while the mole and the government might be a necessary asset that they had to use, they must have felt that having an actual ground agent with prior affiliation to the Estonian church would be an unnecessary risk, as he would be put directly in the way of Finnish security services, and if he were to be captured, it would be a clear relation between this agent and the Estonian church, which would not lead to anything good for that church. Now, this all begs the question, where do our two women come into this? Obviously, they are not professional criminals. So, why were they involved in this obviously very sensitive operation? Well, I believe Darude insisted to his employers that they be involved. He lied to them and said that they were two career criminals and that they would aid significantly in his endeavor. So, why would this hardened career criminal lie to have two unprofessionals involved in a delicate operation? Well, it's time for our next assumption. We have to assume that Darude wants out of this business. He has become tired and jaded from stealing so many sensitive objects. However, leaving this line of work is not something that is easily done. He's obviously deeply involved in the criminal underworld in Europe. So deeply, in fact, that there are numerous individuals who would not want to see him leave his profession, to the point at which they might want to kill him. And while Darude, with all of his past experiences, might be able to avoid such a fate, it's unlikely that his loved ones would. So, in order to successfully exfiltrate from such a dangerous situation, he would have to do so with his loved ones. Now, I'm sure at this point you can see where I'm going with this, but I'm implying that the two women are among the sacred group of loved ones. Now, you might be thinking earlier, well, you said those two were lesbian lovers, and if they're involved in each other, then one of them can't be involved with Darude. And I won't get into polygamy at this point, but I think that one of the women is his sister, niece, or somehow blood relation. And this blood relative would not want to be involved with Darude's harebrained scheme unless she could take with her lover. So why do this all during such a dangerous heist? Well, I think there's a number of reasons for it. The first and foremost being that Darude wants to secure his financial future for him and his sister slash nephew slash niece, what have you. And he can do so by selling, pawning, what have you, the object that he's just stolen from the Finns. He knows it is of extreme importance, and he assumes that there are a number of people who would be willing to pay top dollar to get their hands on it. The second reason being that the heist provides a golden opportunity for him to escape. There's a significant amount of time where he is not accounted for, that being, well, he's in transit between Helsinki harbor and wherever his Estonian contact might be. This window of time allows him to escape to wherever he might want to be. He escapes in a luxury pleasure craft. I mean, these craft could go for, up to 800 miles if they are modified correctly. He could be anywhere in Europe, Russia, what have you. However, I do think there is one place he went in specific, and we can determine this location based on where the sun is in the video. Now, on to the third assumption. We must assume that the sun is setting at the end of the video. And if the sun is setting, he heads away from the setting sun in the east, and then he heads either north or south. Now, if he headed south, he would end up somewhere in northern Europe. However, I do believe he heads north because of something that is located there. So, what is east of Helsinki harbor, but still along the Finnish coast, and a place Darude would want to go? Well, I think there's one place that fits this definition quite well, and that is the ghost town of Gisaro. For a brief history lesson, Gisaro was an iron mining town that was abandoned in 1967. It is the only officially recognized ghost town in Finland. It exists on a small island just south of Raisborg. And I think it makes a lot of sense for Darude to go here. He wants to escape and lay low from numerous criminal elements, as well as the Estonian and Finnish government. What better place to do that than a long-abandoned town, somewhere people have not gone in decades? And there you have it. The harrowing story of a career criminal gone soft who wants to secure a future for his family, and in doing so betrays two of the superpowers of Northern Europe. It seems simple enough, and Occam's razor states that we should go with the simplest solution. However, I think this theory still leaves a couple of unexplained things. However, to go into this, we need to start going into both the supernatural and the religious, something that I am apprehensive at best about doing. However, for viewers' sake, I will go into it. Alright, to kick this off, we have to go back to the initial chase. Now, as our thief leads the two security guards on what can only be described as a wild goose chase, we see Darude appear at a number of instances. He's sitting on walls, watching on, and all the time he seems very calm. And one thing we didn't account for was his transit between these areas. He could have had a car sitting behind wherever he was, but it also begs the question, why did he get out of his vehicle to watch the chase? And at another point in the video, we see the male security guard draw his weapon, a M1911A1 silver with a square trigger guard, and aim it at the thief. However, Darude is present, and while the male security guard does not notice Darude, he does reholster his weapon. And while we may have a curious onlooker with a very fast car, and a security guard who's not willing to take another human being's life, we may have something much more here. And that something is a being who is capable of instantaneous transport between 2 points, and who is able to will mere mortals into both action and inaction. And of course the being I'm referring to is Darude. And while this being could be anything from Anubis to Vishnu to merely a poltergeist, and sticking with the religious undertones of the video, I believe that this being is of Abrahamic origin, perhaps a demigod prophet sent by God himself, or, in my opinion, more likely, one of the 7 princes of hell and servant to Diablo himself. Perhaps Lucifer or Beelzebub, maybe even Mammon. Now, to corroborate this theory, we need to step back and look at something a little bit more grounded in reality, that being the Finnish Private Security Act. Now, the part of the act we'll be looking at is one we already have looked at, and that part is carrying forcible means equipment. And I quote, "Firearms may be carried only in personal guarding or security transport, and when guarding a person or object that is significant in the terms of the public interest." Now, throughout the video, we've made one assumption that I never stated, and that is that what was in the briefcase was an object. However, the Act clearly states that similar precautions would be taken if guarding a person. Now, you might be thinking, well, it's a briefcase. You couldn't fit an adult human being in there, or even a adult animal. However, what I'm implying is maybe it's not an adult, maybe it's a baby. And let's look back into Catholicism and Christianity. There has been one baby that is significant throughout the Holy Book. Now, of course, the baby I'm referring to is Jesus Christ. That's right, Jesus Christ. Now you might be thinking, well, I thought he died at 0 BC. And, well, you're damn right. However, this is the prolific second coming of Christ. And once again, you might be thinking, well, why is the second coming of Christ locked up in a briefcase in Helsinki? Well, I think it's very clear. While baby Jesus might have been born in Bethlehem some odd 2,000 years ago, I think this time he was born somewhere in Finland. And this time there were no wise men bearing gifts. In fact, this time I believe there were Finnish security forces waiting for him. Now, as to why Finnish security forces would be waiting for him, I think it's very clear. The Finnish government recognizes that the second coming of Christ would cause global unrest. Now, as to how the Finns located and secured baby Jesus, well, I think they took a very traditional approach to it and followed the five-pointed star, much like the wise men did 2,000 years ago. In fact, I think all over the world there have been a cabal of individuals and parties watching and waiting for this five-pointed star. Some may call them by names such as the Illuminati, the Freemasons, what have you. However, I think these individuals perhaps had our best interests at heart. The appearance of the five-pointed star would signify the beginning of rapture, Armageddon, the beginning of the end. It serves as an early warning for us, though, in this case. Time for us to prepare for this end time. And to prepare for rapture would mean a number of different things to a number of different people. To some, it might mean getting rid of and destroying all one's material items on this earth in order to fully embrace rapture and ensure a place in heaven. However, to some more tenacious individuals, notably the groups I listed earlier, this might mean time to prepare a defense. This Armageddon would indicate the prodigal war to happen between heaven and hell, a war that would lead to the death and destruction of all those who had not been raptured. However, this war was prophesied many thousands of years ago, and many thousands of years ago, humanity had little more than sticks and stones, nothing that would be notably effective against the divine beings of heaven and hell. But now, 2,000 years later, man has perfected the art of war. Over the centuries, humanity has fielded millions of various weapons and instruments of killing, all the way from the humble spear to the mighty hydrogen bomb. The modern battlefield is made up of perfect instruments of killing, instruments that have evolved over thousands of years for one purpose: to hurt, maim, and kill. And while it may be far-fetched, perhaps we've come further than the divine beings that watch over us had anticipated. Perhaps we have come so far, in fact, that they feel threatened. They feel not wholly sure that they would win a land war between us and them. In fact, they are potentially so unsure of their superiority on the battlefield that they would send one of their own agents to help secure victory in a preemptive strike of sorts. A preemptive strike that would entail securing baby Jesus, getting rid of him, and with him, any early warning that came. And that agent is Darude himself, one of the princes of hell sent to Earth to help ensure that the horsemen of the apocalypse can do their job effectively. Without mankind having an early warning, I believe the powers that be believed that they could win a swift victory over the now evolved humanity. So, whether you believe Darude Sandstorm is a video about an unholy being from the seventh circle of hell, or simply a career criminal who has become jaded from his morally bankrupt job. I think we can all agree that Darude Sandstorm is riddled with hidden meanings, secrets, and Abrahamic symbolism. Thank you for watching, viewer. This has been Darude Sandstorm Reflections.